The pilot took his MiG-29 down to treetop height before he ever crossed the line that mattered, low enough that the river valley beneath him did more to hide the aircraft than anything built into it ever could. This was not a jet designed for this kind of flying. It was designed decades ago for a different war entirely: high-altitude intercepts against other fighters, not a low, twisting run through terrain with a single precision bomb slung underneath, and one of the densest air defense networks on this front waiting somewhere ahead. He was flying it this way anyway, because the alternative, climbing to any altitude where radar could actually see him clearly, was not survivable against what Russia had built around Kostiantynivka. The valley itself had been chosen for a reason that had nothing to do with scenery. Terrain that folds and twists the way this one did does more than block a line of sight from the ground. It breaks up the kind of clean radar return a system needs to build a reliable track, scattering reflections off ridgelines and tree cover until a fast-moving contact at low altitude becomes just one more piece of clutter among many. Flying through it required a level of low-altitude precision that pushes both the aircraft and the pilot close to their limits, banking through turns dictated by the shape of the ground rather than the shortest line to the target, trading a straightforward flight path for one that kept the jet effectively invisible for as long as the terrain allowed. His target was not a trench line or a column of vehicles. It was a building, 4 stories, sitting inside a city Russia was still trying to claim it had already taken. And inside that building were the people who had spent the past several days making life a specific kind of miserable for Ukrainian units defending the ground around it. Drone operators, dozens of them by some estimates, running a coordinated FPV campaign against anything Ukrainian forces tried to move, resupply, or reinforce in the area. Take out the trench, and Russia digs another one. Take out the room full of people flying the drones that had been picking off vehicles and personnel for days, and the entire campaign built around that building stops working, at least for as long as it takes Russia to rebuild it somewhere else with different people. Getting a bomb onto that building meant going through everything Russia had layered into this stretch of the front, and the list was not short. An S-400 battery sat somewhere behind the line, capable of reaching out far beyond the visual horizon against anything flying high enough to be seen, its long-range radar built specifically to catch exactly the kind of high-altitude approach a strike aircraft would normally prefer. Closer in, a Buk M3 covered the medium altitudes, exactly the kind of airspace a strike aircraft normally climbs into to get a clean line on a target, fast enough to engage something that thought it had already cleared the most dangerous part of the approach. Closer still, Pantsir and Tor systems handled the short-range gap, the kind of low-altitude, close-in threat that a jet trying to sneak in under everything else would eventually have to fly past, each one capable of switching between missiles and rapid-fire cannon depending on how close and how fast the target closed. Layered over all of it, reconnaissance drones fed a constant picture back to Russian command, watching for exactly the kind of unusual low-altitude activity a mission like this one would inevitably create, and electronic warfare systems worked to jam or spoof anything trying to navigate or communicate through the airspace above. On paper, this was not a target a single aging fighter jet should have been able to reach at all. Any one of those systems, used correctly, gives a defender a real chance. Together, layered and overlapping the way Russia had built them here, they are supposed to make the entire approach corridor effectively closed to anything without stealth capability the MiG-29 simply does not have. The plan built around reaching it anyway depended on never giving any of those systems a clean shot in the first place. Rather than climbing to altitude and approaching the target directly, the pilot planned a run that stayed low the entire way in, following the folds of a river valley that Russian planners had never fully closed with radar coverage, because doing so would have meant burying sensors in terrain that made line-of-sight detection close to impossible from any reasonable range. Low altitude does not make an aircraft invisible. It makes an aircraft harder to see early, and against a network built around layered detection ranges, harder to see early is very often the entire difference between a mission that works and one that ends in a fireball over open ground. Nearly 50 kilometers out from the target, still low, still following terrain, the pilot began the maneuver the mission had been built around from the start. A toss bombing run, pulling the nose of the aircraft up sharply, releasing the AASM Hammer at the top of that climb, and immediately rolling back down toward the terrain before the jet ever had to fly anywhere near the airspace closest to the target. It is not a new technique. Pilots have used variations of it for decades, specifically to avoid overflying the most heavily defended airspace around a target, letting the weapon's own guidance handle the final, most dangerous stretch of the flight instead of the aircraft carrying it there directly. What made it work here was distance. 50 kilometers is far enough that the jet itself, the thing every one of those layered defenses was actually built to shoot down, was already turning away and dropping back toward the valley floor before Russian radar had a real chance to build a track worth acting on. The bomb itself was now on its own, and this was where the mission's other layer of risk came into play. An AASM Hammer navigates primarily through a blend of inertial guidance and satellite positioning, correcting itself toward a preloaded target point as it flies. 50 kilometers deep into contested airspace, satellite positioning is not something any munition can simply count on. Russian electronic warfare in this sector had spent months building exactly the kind of GPS denial environment meant to turn precision weapons like this one into expensive, inaccurate scrap. The Hammer flew through that jamming largely on inertial guidance alone, a system that does not depend on any outside signal at all, calculating its own position purely from motion and acceleration measured from the moment it left the aircraft. It is less precise over distance than GPS correction would be. It is also nearly impossible to jam because there is no external signal to jam in the first place. In the final seconds of the flight, the bomb's infrared seeker took over from inertial guidance entirely, hunting for the specific heat and shape signature it had been told to expect at the end of its run. This is where toss bombing at 50 kilometers into a single window stops sounding like an exaggeration and starts sounding like exactly what modern precision guidance is built to do. The seeker did not need a person correcting its path in real time. It needed a clear enough thermal picture in the last stretch of flight to lock onto the building's signature and adjust its terminal approach accordingly. And against a 4-story structure that had been running powered equipment inside it for days, generating exactly the kind of heat signature an infrared seeker is built to find, that picture was there waiting for it. The bomb went through a window, not the roof, not a wall breach, a single window on one of the upper floors, the kind of precision that turns a strike from "the building was hit" into "the room believed to be running the operation was hit specifically." Whatever the initial blast did on its own, it was not the whole story. Inside that building, Russian drone operators had been storing exactly the kind of materials that make a single small detonation catastrophic rather than merely damaging. Lithium batteries, dozens of them, charging and staged for the FPV drones being flown out of that location day after day. Stockpiled explosives, presumably meant for the drones themselves or for whatever secondary operations the site supported. Thermite and stored fuel, the kind of combination that does not need a large warhead to become genuinely destructive, because the building's own contents do most of the work once the first fire starts. Lithium battery fires do not behave like ordinary fires. Once a cell goes into thermal runaway, it feeds itself, generating its own oxygen internally, and burning at extreme temperatures that conventional firefighting struggles to interrupt even under controlled conditions, let alone inside a structure that has just taken a direct hit and has no fire response coming at all. With dozens of cells packed into one space, one failing battery does not stay isolated. It ignites the batteries next to it, and within seconds, the failure cascades through the entire stockpile, each cell venting hot gas and flame into the next, before anyone could have contained even the first one. Add stored explosives and thermite into that same chain reaction. Thermite in particular capable of burning through steel and concrete at temperatures well beyond anything a normal structure fire produces. And what started as a single guided bomb through a single window became something closer to a controlled demolition. The building's own contents turning against it floor by floor, faster than anyone inside could have organized an evacuation, even if the initial blast had left them the chance to try. What made the building such an effective, if unintentional, weapon against itself was the same thing that had made it useful as a drone operations center in the first place. Running dozens of FPV drones day after day requires exactly the kind of infrastructure that turns catastrophically dangerous the moment it catches fire. Rows of batteries on constant charge cycles, replacement parts and munitions staged close at hand for a fast turnaround between sorties, fuel stored for generators keeping the whole operation running independent of the local grid. None of that was placed there with this outcome in mind. It existed purely to keep the drone campaign against Ukrainian positions running efficiently, and it succeeded at that right up until the moment it became the reason there was nothing left of the building at all. By the time the fire finished working through what remained of the structure, there was very little left resembling a functioning command post. Whatever equipment, whatever operators, whatever coordination infrastructure had been running Russia's drone campaign against that stretch of the Kostiantynivka front from inside those 4 floors was gone in the space of a few catastrophic minutes, and it did not come back the next day the way a damaged trench line or a destroyed vehicle eventually does. The tactical effect on the ground was immediate in a way that strikes against less centralized targets rarely produce. FPV drone operations do not run on standing infrastructure the way artillery does. They depend on operators, specific trained people sitting in a specific room with specific equipment and specific coordination links back to whoever is directing the broader assault on that part of the city. Destroy the room, and you do not just destroy equipment that gets replaced from a warehouse somewhere behind the line. You destroy the trained people who had spent days learning the exact terrain, the exact Ukrainian positions, the exact patterns of movement they had been hunting. Ukrainian units in the area reported a real, immediate drop in the intensity and accuracy of FPV attacks against their positions in the hours and days that followed. The kind of gap that does not show up cleanly in any single after-action report, but shows up very clearly in how much easier it suddenly becomes to move a resupply vehicle without losing it. Kostiantynivka itself was not some minor waypoint on the map. It sits at the center of one of the most contested and strategically important stretches of the entire Donbas front, a logistics and defensive hub that both sides have spent months bleeding resources to hold. A city Russian officials had already, prematurely, claimed to have captured, only for Ukrainian command to confirm publicly, repeatedly, and with data pulled from its own battlefield management systems, that it remained under Ukrainian control. In a fight where control of a city this significant gets contested as much in public statements as it does on the actual ground, degrading the specific capability that had been grinding down Ukrainian defenders inside it mattered for reasons that go beyond just this one building. There is a broader story sitting underneath this single mission, one about what happens when an air force fighting with genuinely limited resources has to find ways to make old airframes do jobs they were never originally built for. The MiG-29 flying this mission is a Soviet-era design, decades old, built for a completely different kind of air war than the one it flew this particular night. What made this strike possible was not the airframe itself. It was everything bolted onto and integrated with that airframe since a modern French precision weapon, a guidance system built to survive exactly the kind of electronic warfare environment Russia has spent years perfecting, and a tactic, toss bombing from well outside the effective range of the defenses actually in play, that let an aircraft with real limitations still reach a target sitting behind some of the most sophisticated layered air defense on this entire front. Integrating a Western precision weapon onto an airframe never designed to carry it is not a simple bolt-on job. It requires new wiring, new targeting software, new procedures for pilots trained on an entirely different generation of avionics, and months of testing to make sure the aircraft and the weapon actually communicate the way they need to in the split second before release. Ukraine has been running exactly this kind of integration work across its remaining Soviet-era fleet for a couple of years now, and missions like this one are the visible payoff of work that mostly happens far from any front line, in workshops and testing ranges where nobody is filming anything dramatic at all. That combination, old airframe, modern precision weapon, a flight profile built around the specific weaknesses of the defense it is flying against, is not a one-time trick. It is closer to a template, one that does not require an air force to somehow acquire an entirely new generation of stealth aircraft to keep reaching targets its enemy has convinced itself are protected. It requires knowing exactly where the gaps in a layered defense actually sit, mapping terrain and radar coverage with the same patience that goes into planning any long-range strike, and being willing to fly a genuinely dangerous, low-altitude route through terrain most planners would rather avoid, in exchange for a shot at a target that would otherwise sit untouchable for as long as the defense around it holds. None of this makes the mission risk-free, and it would be a mistake to treat it as a formula that works the same way every time. A different valley, a different radar layout, a slightly earlier detection somewhere along the route, and this becomes a very different story, one involving a downed aircraft rather than a destroyed command post. Every version of this tactic that succeeds is also, quietly, a version that could just as easily have failed, and the pilots flying these missions know that better than anyone watching the footage afterward. Every drone command post Russia builds behind its layered air defenses is making the same bet Kostiantynivka's operators made without ever choosing to. That altitude, range, and a dense enough network of radar and missile systems will keep a threat like this one out. That bet held right up until a single jet flying low enough to disappear into a river valley proved, through one window on one building, that it does not always hold at all. What do you think? Was this strike more about the target it destroyed, or about proving what an upgraded Soviet-era jet can still do against a modern air defense network? Let us know in the comments below.